Oh man, you already are all in here.
Is that Kelly?
Yeah, this is Kelly.
Okay. Hi, Kelly.
I was like, how come everybody's already in here?
No, it just let us in. I clicked on it 2 minutes ago and it said it was waiting.
Perfect. Yeah, because it's the other session. So, okay, I have to go through my list now to make sure I have everything clicked right.
Okay, take your time. We got a couple minutes. I just didn't want to be late.
Did you just get my co-host?
Okay. I did.
Good.
I was just made a co-host. Yeah.
Okay, we'll just wait another minute, and then I have the housekeeping stuff to start on real quick.
Okay.
I think we've hit 2:45. We will get this going. So hello everyone, and welcome to Creating a Climate and Environmentally Resilient Food System. I'm Kelly Noderman, and I work as a communications director at the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. I would like to introduce today's facilitators, Joshua Faulkner of UVM's Center for Sustainable Agriculture and Alyssa White of UVM's Agroecology and Livelihoods Collaborative. Thank you for coming. Before we get started, I'm going to quickly run through some expectations for the session. Be sure that your Zoom name reflects your first and last name and your place of work, if applicable. So you can just go up to the corner of your screen and there's little dots and you can rename yourself. So if you don't have your real name in there, please put that in there. And if you can add your job, that would be great too. Please remain muted unless called upon or engaging in breakout room conversation. Use the raised hand feature to let the host know that you would like to speak. And if when it is appropriate, we'll call on you. And you can also type your name or your question or comment into the chat or Q&A feature on the Zoom call. So Please don't interrupt others. Come to the conversation from a place of kindness and respect. And note that these sessions are being recorded and we will be sharing them on our website following the gathering. So I hope to actually have those up early next week. So everything that, if you're missing another session that you wanted to go to, you'll be able to see all of them. So that'd be kind of neat. And I'm going to put the link to the gathering website into this chat feature as well. And now I'm going to turn things over to the facilitators.
Thanks, Kelly. So I'm Joshua Faulkner, and I'm going to start with just a quick discussion of the agenda, kind of lay it out for us, and introduction of what we hope to achieve. And for a little bit, maybe for a little bit more introduction, I'll say I'm a research assistant professor with UVM Extension and also coordinate the Farming and Climate Change program, and it's so wonderful to see so many familiar faces and new faces too, faces I'm not familiar with, but I wish this could be in person. And I quickly want to give Alyssa, Dr. Alyssa White, a moment to introduce herself as well.
Thanks, Joshua. Hi, everybody. My name's Alyssa White. I just defended my PhD here at UVM last week. And Joshua is my advisor. I work in the Plant and Soil Science Department here at UVM and am headed into a postdoc with the Gund Institute starting in January, working with Heather Darby and a number of other people.
Okay, thanks, Alyssa. So I'm going to go ahead and put up our opening slide here. Let's see. Hopefully everyone can see that. Okay, so really the objective here today is to discuss a few of the legislative briefs that were finalized and put into the Vermont Agriculture and Food System Plan put together by Farm to Plate. The first, I think it's part one, was released this year, and there will be another part of this, as Jake mentioned, released in, I think it's February. But myself and Alyssa had leading roles in 3 of these briefs, and those being the climate change brief, the water quality brief, and the payment for ecosystem services brief. And so we're going to have, we're going to briefly, about 10 minutes per brief, present some of the key bullet points from each brief. We're going to have about a half-an-hour Q&A session just for general questions about the brief, where we're all together in this common session. And then we're going to break into 2 subgroups, 2 breakout rooms, which is going to be a little bit of Zoom magic, but Kelly is going to help us with that, for another 30 minutes of either a payment for ecosystem services breakout room or a water quality and climate change combination breakout room. And so you'll have a choice of which breakout room you want to go to when it's time to do that. And then we're going to come back together for a final 10 to 15 minutes to report out to the whole group about the discussion in there. So really the idea here is to talk about some of these key points, make sure we get input from you, the Farm to Plate community, about where the priorities should be moving forward, ideas on strategies on how to implement some of the recommendations within the brief, and just generally get your make sure you're aware of these briefs and get your buy-in and kind of your support and or additional feedback on where we got it wrong. So with that, I'm going to try to let's see, minimize my. I'm seeing a lot of faces on the screen, so I'm going to try to move that. But I'm going to start with the climate change brief. I'm going to try to keep myself on time here as well. I'm going to do the climate change brief, then I'm going to talk about the water quality brief, and then hand it to Alyssa to talk about the payment for ecosystem services brief. Okay, so climate change in Vermont. Subject I've been working on for 6-7 years now, so this felt like really familiar territory, gathering a group of folks to get their ideas and put this together into a very succinct 2-page summary of where we are in agriculture in terms of the effects of climate change and the challenges and recommendations to the state legislature. So just some high-level data points here to start to kind of frame the conversation. If you've seen my presentations before, you're familiar with this slide, but we know that it's getting wetter in Vermont. Over the past century, in the Northeast, we've seen an increase of about 4 inches or so for the annual average. But when you look at the Vermont data, that's actually very different. We're seeing a much steeper increase in annual precipitation in Vermont, and I'm highlighting some data there in the red and black text that shows that in the Northeast Kingdom, that really sticks out, where we've seen a 9-inch increase in annual average precipitation, and that's just in the last 30 years. So of course, as a farmer, 4 inches over multiple generations, over 100 years on the farm, not such a big deal, but 9 inches over 30 years, that's a single generation. And so that is a big deal. So that's one of the key challenges with climate change. And then the other piece of this is not just that we're getting more rainfall, it's that the patterns of rainfall are changing as well. So we're seeing more heavy precipitation, more frequent extreme events. And this is a figure from the latest National Climate Assessment, which shows that the Northeast has seen a 55% increase in very heavy precipitation events from 1958 to 2016, which is head and shoulders above the rest of the country. And so if you've been in Vermont for any amount of time, I think you can attest to this, and we hear this from farmers too, regardless of where they're, where they stand on climate change, and if they're skeptical of the science, whatever it may be, they'll talk about this, witnessing this and observing this in their lifetime on the farm. And then, I threw in this high-level data point as well, because I think it's just to say it's not all doom and gloom. There's clear challenges, but then there is this piece where it's getting warmer, and this is also leading to an increased length of growing season in Vermont too. So just to kind of keep an open mind about this, and where we may be able to make lemonade out of lemons. Farmers are very interested in this as well, and the data strongly supports this lengthening growing season. Okay, so now I have a few text bullet points that I want to just kind of touch on to sum up our current conditions. These precipitation changes that I mentioned, not just increasing precip, but the change in patterns will impact crop production in a variety of ways, whether it's that devastating flooding like was associated with Tropical Storm Irene, or whether it's just soil saturation in the spring or fall, compaction of our soils, especially our clay soils in the Champlain Valley, and then delayed harvest and planting management activities by farmers, and of course soil loss, erosion. And then that leads right into this other concern where climate change is really creating, exacerbating kind of the water quality challenge we had ahead of us, with limiting the amount of nutrient and soil runoff from the landscape. Where we have these extreme storms, we get more and more of that. So that's a concern as well. And then, as I mentioned, warming temperatures and more moisture during the growing season can lead to more pests, different diseases, more disease, weeds, et cetera, for the conventional grower. Of course, this could mean more agrochemical uses. For the organic grower, this means likely more man hours, labor, whatever it is. It means an additional expense to the farm. We're also seeing more droughty periods, and even farms with existing irrigation may struggle with extended drought. We saw this in 2017 in the drought in Western New York. There was a study done on farmers there with millions and millions of dollars worth of loss, even with the farms that had irrigation. So it may mean increasing investment in irrigation infrastructure, even for the farms that have it. And then some farms will adapt, but not, just to be honest, not all have the capacity. In some cases, there are significant financial or technical obstacles, and so we need to keep that in mind, that this is not a simple adaptation for some farms. And then farmers are interested in mitigation as well. So it's not just adaptation that farmers are have in their minds, it's also mitigation. And currently there is no, and by mitigation, I mean reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, storing of carbon on the farm, in the soils, in the woodlands, what have you. And no current PES system exists for this. So the science is trying to catch up with the enthusiasm, I think, in the agricultural community. All right. So bottlenecks and gaps. So if you're familiar with the briefs, this is how they're organized. There's first current conditions, then we have a section on bottlenecks and gaps, then we have a section on opportunities, and then finally recommendations. So I'm just walking through slides as if we were reading the brief. So our bottlenecks and gaps are that, and this is great survey work done by Alyssa, where some of these data points come from, that vegetable and berry growers do use crop insurance at a very low rate, around 7%, due to some onerous guidelines or structures of the programs. So that's of concern, given the amount of threats we have to production with climate change. And farmers do understand that they're vulnerable to extreme weather. Again, more data from survey work by Alyssa, but fewer claim to have the knowledge and skill to deal with the threats. So there's a lack of understanding, a lack of confidence out there of how farmers are going to adapt. And then only less than half of the farmers say they have the financial capacity to deal with the threats. So that's certainly of concern. And then adaptation is currently not funded by any financial or technical assistance explicitly in the state of Vermont. And then with most things, the research is lacking, especially given the variety of farms, the diversity of farms, the diversity of enterprises on farms. We don't have good, solid, grounded research on adaptation for all these types of farms and enterprises. Opportunities in this space. I think that there is an opportunity to tap into knowledge and practices from our neighbors to the south. Neighbors that are experiencing weather perhaps similar to what we may see in the future in Vermont, looking into the mid-Atlantic, to the extension services, to the land-grant universities and the research they're doing in those states. I think there's a big opportunity there. And then, as Alyssa will talk quite a bit about payment for ecosystem service programs to potentially provide some payments to farmers, some compensation for mitigation in the agricultural arena. And then Vermont can also partner not just within the ag community, but the state as a whole, and in other groups within the states and groups and policies to encourage climate action with those outside of the state and nationally and internationally to slow climate change, giving farmers more time to adapt. And then finally, the recommendations for this in the climate change area are to fund a training program to be given to all service providers that work on farms and with farmers related to climate change and agriculture. And then of course they can pass on that information after rigorous training to the farms they work with on how to adapt. And then really tap into the existing like the Farmer Coalition, the Champlain Valley Farmers Coalition, the Watershed Group in the Connecticut Valley, so on and so forth, to use those for peer-to-peer outreach, which we know to be very effective in bringing about change. And then further investigate market mechanisms and existing systems nationally and internationally for climate change payment for ecosystem services, systems and schemes. And then one more recommendation slide on climate change. Investigate funding mechanisms, innovative funding mechanisms to assist farmers with these climate change practices, what we know can work, can be helpful, can add resilience, and then help with crop insurance for diversified Vermont scale farms, and make sure that we are prepared when emergencies do hit farms, that we have financial structures in place for events like Irene, that we can assist the agricultural community. And then I've mentioned this, that some BMPs for adaptation remain out of reach for many farms financially. And then finally, the last recommendation would be to work on carbon sequestration offset protocols so that we can engage in some of these other initiatives, and farmers can start to generate revenue by providing offsets. Okay, I think we're gonna keep rolling. I'm gonna go right through water quality, then Alyssa's gonna talk, and then we're gonna have 30 minutes after that. So I apologize that we're just motoring right along, but I think that'll work okay, and then we'll have lots of time after this. So now I'm gonna jump into the water quality brief. Again, same structure here. So current conditions are that water quality efforts have generally been focused, recent water quality efforts have generally been focused on the Lake Champlain Basin due to the TMDL there. But water quality improvements are needed throughout the state. And here's one of the data, one of the charts within that brief that shows the investments by basin, state investments by basin within the state. And you can see that there's $66 million have gone to the Lake Champlain Basin from 2016 to 2018. But there's also been money invested in these other basins as well. Okay, and so farmers have in general stepped up to the challenge of this water quality challenge and have significantly, in some cases, in some watersheds, significantly increased the usage of BMPs. Regulatory and evolving financial and technical assistance programs by our state and federal agencies have all played very important roles in this. It's not just being the agencies, but also our educational organizations like Extension. And then farmers are becoming increasingly interested, as evidenced in last year's legislative session, in payment for ecosystem service programs. And the dairy economy, we are all, of course, aware of the challenges in the dairy economy right now and over the past couple years, in combination with you know, this increasing age of the average farmer, and in some cases is inhibiting investment in the water quality best management practices that are being promoted and we know that work. And then I mentioned this earlier, climate change exacerbates the soil nutrient loss. So climate change is not helping this or work around water quality. It actually is making it a little bit more difficult because of the rainfall patterns. But we do have a very strong partnership led by the Vermont Agricultural Water Quality Partnership across agencies and groups working on this topic in the state that are very well connected. We're a small state, and so this is a strength we have in Vermont. And so the way this water quality brief was broken up, it was broken up into 3 key issues. The first one being soil management, and so I'll walk through that issue. I'll walk through each of those issues. So there's a growing knowledge awareness, as we saw from Kat's presentation in the plenary, and interest in soil health. There's a lot of energy here around soil health. Soil health has potential to benefit farm and farmer, but also at the same time provide some ecosystem services for the wider society and Vermont communities. It can improve resilience of the farm and increases water infiltration and increases water holding capacity for drought resilience. And then many of the commonly accepted, the BMPs we're using to improve soil health, there are many in our toolbox, and we're figuring out how to apply those to different cropping systems, to different types of farms. So there's, and as I mentioned, there's a lot of adoption of these practices already. So what are the bottlenecks and gaps around soil health, or around soil management rather? Really, it needs to be economically sustainable. You know, these investments in soil health have to fit into a production system where a farm can still remain financially viable. They have to have some return on this investment for the farm. There is, unfortunately, lots of clear data linking soil health to water quality. There's data that links soil health to other things, but at a watershed scale, there's little that links that. But we have some projects in place right now that is trying to fill in that knowledge gap. And in general, data on soil health on Vermont farms and a variety of farms and a variety of soil series and textures is fairly sparse in the state. And then measuring soil health can be expensive, especially if you use some of the established laboratories like the Cornell Soil Health Assessment Test. And then we need some program flexibility for figuring out, we can't have one size fits all best management practices to improve soil health. We need some flexibility in these programs for different types of farms, different sizes of farms, different types of production systems. Opportunities in this space. As I mentioned, we have excellent farmer-led organizations for peer-to-peer education. These are a strength of Vermont agriculture. And we have lots of soil health success stories that can be promoted from around the state from some of our superstar farms and farmers. And then soil health, in addition to potentially helping with water quality, also can provide some climate change mitigation benefits and other resilience benefits to communities, to downstream communities. And then, as I mentioned, there's tremendous energy around this, especially with the newer farmers and beginning farmers. Okay, our second key issue was in this water quality brief was manure and phosphorus management. So if you live in the Champlain Basin, the discussions around phosphorus are nothing new to you. And so we identified this because of the level of investment in the work that's being done in that basin, specifically on phosphorus, as another key issue for water quality. So because of management systems, because of legacy management systems and existing management systems, we have elevated the level of phosphorus in many of our soils that have received manure year after year after year. And so we have this bank of phosphorus termed legacy phosphorus in these soils. We do use management plans. Farmers do use management plans and other strategies to prevent building up of P above certain thresholds and to try to avoid phosphorus loss from these fields. So farmers are, have structures and plans in place and tools like manure injection and the phosphorus index. But there's a clear need for more tools and better distribution of phosphorus to prevent this buildup. Bottlenecks and gaps around manure and phosphorus management. We still live in Vermont. Even though the climate is changing, we have long winters, we have frozen soils, and these combine to create potential for tremendous amounts of runoff from our fields. And as I mentioned, climate change remains a challenge. Manure injection, which is maybe one of the more promising newer technologies, does not work for all farms. All farms don't use liquid manure. All farms don't have the capital necessary to invest in liquid systems. Some farms have very distributed fields where liquid injection is difficult. Overall, there is a surplus of phosphorus in Vermont. The state P balances have shown that, but there are still some fields on many farms that are still in need of phosphorus. So we can't say that every field in the state has all the phosphorus that we need to produce good yields, optimum yields. And if we were to cut back on manure or eliminate manure, nitrogen that's in that manure is still necessary for the crops. If we're trying to cut back manure to avoid the phosphorus, crops still need the nitrogen in the manure, and that represents an additional cost to the farm if they have to purchase nitrogen inputs. And that would be nearly impossible on many organic farms who are not allowed to use synthetic nitrogen sources. And then there is no there's no functioning manure transfer program for getting manure and phosphorus from farms that have too much to fields that have too little. Opportunities in this area are that manure is a very valuable commodity on farms, is a very valuable resource, especially when we think about soil health. We're very lucky to have integrated crop livestock systems in Vermont because we have this manure and all the organic matter that it brings to our soils. There are lots of new technologies being investigated, removing phosphorus from manure on dairy farms, injecting manure on grasslands, and some of these VPIC, Vermont Phosphorus Innovation Challenge solutions. Excuse me. Lots of new innovation occurring in this area. And the existing nutrient management planning system is a good framework to improve upon. We have the structure in place. It's kind of a framework in which we can use to add additional tools, additional programs, so on and so forth. So that, I think that's an opportunity for us. Our third key issue is tile drainage, and again, if you're in the Champlain Basin, excuse me, you've heard of tile drainage and the concerns around this, and how farms are using tile drainage at increasing rates because of climate change. And that's because it has been shown to dramatically increase crop yields and allow for farmers to get into a field and plant when they need to and harvest when they need to. So very important. Timing is extremely important, almost as much as you know, the growth through the season. And this is happening not just on large farms with field crops, but also our vegetable farms, our fruit farms. All farms are using and interested in tile drainage because of the benefits. Monitoring data, as some of you know, has raised a significant concern around the environmental impact of drainage, and so this is very clear that there's some concern here, and more research needs to be done to understand the ins and outs of it. And Heather Darby had done some survey work last year or year before that has shown that tile drainage actually enables adoption of some soil health best management practices like cover crops and no-till. So this is a very gray area. There's some catch-22s here. So it's a really interesting topic and something we need to kind of sort through. Bottlenecks in this area, we have just to kind of sum bottlenecks up in just a couple words. We have very little information on this. Some research projects in place, but in general, we don't know as much as we should, but we're getting there with some funded projects, but more work needs to be done. And opportunities in this space, farmers are interested in this. They want to be involved in research and practical ways to reduce phosphorus loss from tile drainage because it is so important for their production systems. And there are new advancements in tile outlet treatment systems that are being made all the time, both here and elsewhere within the country. And I think there's an opportunity to provide some technical assistance to put in tile in different ways, to put in best management practices at the time of installation to minimize P loss. And so our recommendations from the brief in this area are to fund conservation districts and farmer organizations to do more farmer-to-farmer education about improved management, invest a lot of money in studying field scale performance of best management practices to inform a payment for ecosystem services program. I'm not going to talk about these initiatives here because I'm running out of time quickly. And then invest some dollars into monitoring soil health and build a statewide database, benchmark certain soil types, correlate changes with best management practices, increase our knowledge around soil health, really, and kind of what the current state is and where we can go on our soils in Vermont. Fund the Agency of Ag's Farm Agricultural Agronomic Practices Program and their capital equipment assistance program, just to ease the burden of improving management on farms for farmers. And then continue to fund this Vermont Phosphorus Innovation Challenge to launch the current projects and pilot the most promising technologies. Okay, so thank you. I apologize, I had to move a little quick. It took a little longer than I expected, but I want to quickly hand it over to Alyssa so she can go ahead.
Joshua, we have a lot of questions that kind of rolled in through the chat throughout your talk. There's a bunch of them. I don't know if we want to wait till the end before we jump into breakouts, or if you want to go through and answer them.
So we have, I think there's 30 minutes dedicated to questions on all of the presentations. And mine will only be about 10 minutes long. And I fear that if we get into questions, we'll just like go down the rabbit hole and it won't be able to go back.
I was thinking that as well, so.
Okay, yeah.
I saw flashing lights, but I didn't want to stop and look at what's going on there.
So keep asking people.
Yes.
And hold tight.
Right, yeah, we see those questions in there. And can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great, okay. So just as a reminder, Kelly let me know that at some point you'll need to indicate in the chat box which breakout group you want to be in. And at the end, you know, this is kind of a two-part session. We give all this information out there real quick, and then the second half is really dedicated to discussion. So there'll be two breakout groups, one with me and one with Joshua. I'll host one on payment for ecosystem services, and Joshua will host one really focused on climate change and water quality. And so I'll remind you at the end of my little presentation here, but Kelly will have to place each person into a group, and I think there's about 50 people here. So if we can get our list soon instead of all at once during break time, it might be helpful. Okay, so let's see. I was here a year ago at Farm to Plate, and I helped present about this topic with Ryan Patch and Gay Symington, and I think a lot has happened in the last year. So in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to try to summarize this issue, what work has been done in the community, and then give you some ideas about where we're heading. Of course, this is based on one of those issue briefs, which I helped write with Nancy Everhart, and that was, we wrote it last winter, I think in February or something, and I imagine things have changed in the last couple months. So really, it's just meant to be fodder for conversation about what the next year might hold, and what are the most important things for us to keep working on. So I'm going to give you an introduction and work through kind of the same outline that the briefs hold, which is talking about current conditions, identifying challenges and opportunities. The recommendations in this report are based on those from the Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group that was the legislature asked to be put together. And then I'll add just a couple other recent efforts that I know about that are important to this conversation. So what are ecosystem services? Let's make sure we all know those are the benefits provided by ecosystems to people. And there are a lot of them, both from just provisioning food, but also to regulating stable climate or flood mitigation. And there's even these kind of invisible cultural services like sense of place or cultural identity. And there are a lot of them that are very important in Vermont. And I think these 5 here are the ones that I hear the most conversation about in Vermont. And they're the major benefits that people obtain from farms, which discussion in Vermont has really been centered around. So there's clearly an opportunity to address climate change through changes in farm management by drawing down carbon in soil. And we have also, a lot of people have identified farming as one of the most cost-effective places to address water quality issues by reducing phosphorus loading through changes in farming. The goal of paying farmers for ecosystem services is to compensate them for those public goods that society benefits from in changes to management that prioritize conservation, but that they're not paid for in the price of food. And so in some way, this is payment for ecosystem services is a way to address major ecological crises that are affecting Vermonters, but also to compensate farmers in ways that could support their financial viability and ensure that other benefits to our community that come from farms continue to be sustained, including food and cultural identity and many others. And getting this right has important implications for what the future of conservation incentive programs may look like. So the conversation around this and the planning that's happening right now, I think are really important. But to get there, we have a lot of collective learning to do. And it will require changes and transformations in multiple spheres. And really in which we as the Farm to Plate community work collectively. So this is a great place to think creatively about how we can get where we want to go. So it'll need both new policy and regulatory structures, probably new and long-term sources of capital to fund the idea, We'll need advances in technology to measure changes in ecosystem services, new program paradigms to administer a payment for ecosystem services program. It opens up an opportunity to enhance markets based on recognizing environmental footprint from farms, but most of all, I think it requires changes in farm management. And so we need to focus on supporting farms in knowing which changes they need to make that enhance ecosystem service provisioning, and then also support them in having the capability to make those changes. And that's really the core of what the payment for ecosystem service conversation is about in Vermont, providing financial incentives to make changes that have quantifiable or measurable impact on the supply of ecosystem services from farms. And there are lots of programs that exist that already support farmers' capacity to invest in practices. And those are practices that are known to promise lots of environmental benefits, and they work really well. There's a lot of cost share programs out there. Farmers love them. And they're really often structured around the cost to the farmers of making the changes. And those are considered these practice-based programs on the left there, and they work. They're responsible for a lot of change of impact, but the concept that the new payment for ecosystem service conversations has converged around, which make them innovative and different from these practice-based programs, is the idea of paying farmers for performance. So often that's paying farmers for the amount of reduced phosphorus flux off their farm, or for the amount of carbon that they're increasing in their soil. So the idea is around quantifying the impact and making payments based on that rather than practice. And these performance-based programs are appealing to both regulators and farmers because environmental regulators can account for impact really easily, which is nice, especially when you're dealing with something like a TMDL, right? But farmers are also really interested in learning, like that information on the specific performance of their farm gives them and the opportunity to innovate that this performance-based programs offers is really interesting to farmers. And I think it's important to acknowledge that the farmer watershed coalitions in collaboration with UVM Extension really got this on the agenda at the legislature. They put out a proposal, and I think they really were responsible for stimulating a lot of the state legislative level conversation about this. Although there's a lot of convergence of thought and interest at the same time over the last year and a half here in the state, but elsewhere in the country. So in 2019, the Vermont legislature outlined a very specific mandate to pursue this, and they developed a working group of many different voices and perspectives to recommend to the legislature a path forward. And I know that there's many folks that were part of this working group in our session today, so that'll be helpful. And those folks identified a payment for ecosystem services program and future as a paradigm shift from farming land to stewarding it, from paying only for crops and commodities to paying for those additional ecosystem services too. And it put a focus from fields onto landscapes, and from payment to practices, from payment for practices to payment for performance, and from modeling performance to monitoring it or quantifying it as the goal. And I think it's really challenging to design a payment for ecosystem services program which balances the goals and needs of all the stakeholders. And so they did a lot of work together, but I also think they realized that it's challenging to do everything that you want to do with the program and please all of the different stakeholders that were involved. But there are multiple efforts underway to figure out what to measure, how to structure payments, and how to balance efficiency of a program with fairness and rewarding farmers who are good stewards, while also allowing farmers the flexibility to innovate and adapt. Major challenges. First is, as Joshua already outlined, there is a complex relationship between soil health and water quality, and what the working group identified as a goal was to pay farmers based on changes in soil health. And there are potentially maybe some trade-offs in ecosystem services that are outcomes from different management practices. And so there is a need for more research in establishing how we do that and how to deal with the complexity and relationships there. And then we also need to get some consensus on how exactly we're going to quantify performance. Some people talk about really wanting to measure it on every farm, but that's incredibly challenging. We don't have the technology to do that. So there are maybe some in-between points. Well, I guess we could do it for carbon, but in terms of measuring phosphorus loss off every farm, it's likely that modeling is just where we have to go. But so there's no consensus, but there's a lot of different ideas. And then this issue of fairness, I think, is one of the biggest challenges. So how do we make sure that we're both rewarding and investing in farmers who are invested in conservation and have already have their farm ecosystems functioning at like a really high level of ecosystem performance, rather than investing in places where there's a problem and those farmers that have been dragging their feet on investing in conservation. And that's where the biggest environmental gains are to be made, but that means that farmers who have waited for a long time or have put off investing in conservation on their own maybe get more payments. And this is something that's come up in conversations and focus groups and research that we've done with farmers, is the issue of fairness and rewarding good stewards, but and balancing that with just the efficiency of the program. Another big challenge is like how we're going to pay for it in the long term and make those payments worthwhile to farmers and meaningful to actually help them make a change and impact the viability of their farm operation. There's also some conflicting considerations about who administers a program. I think the Agency of Agriculture has some programs set up that would be maybe well suited to run it, but there's we've heard from some farmers maybe that because of the way the RAPs were rolled out, that there's not a ton of trust always. And then just in terms of opportunities here, there are lots of programs outside of Vermont that can be used as models. And there are some existing measurement tools that can be adapted. It really stands out as a cost-effective way to meet environmental goals in terms of just paying farmers for ecosystem services. It's when we think about making gains in addressing environmental crises, this is something that is frequently, paying farmers is frequently is mentioned and identified as being one of the most cost-effective ways to get there, both in terms of addressing phosphorus in the Lake Champlain Basin and also climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. There are some funding options that exist. We know the Vermont Clean Water Fund could potentially, some of it could go towards a payment for phosphorus program. Folks have talked about private and nonprofit partnerships, which have been developed in the Midwest. There might be some careful consideration about if that's the right fit for Vermont. And there is this pilot program that the state runs, the Vermont Environmental Stewardship Program, and they are kind of a perfect pilot for trialing this. Let's see. The recommendations that went into this brief were based on that report from the Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group, which was to continue the multi-stakeholder working group and expand its membership to include more voices, to conduct more research on understanding soil health and the services it provides, to conduct more research on how to best measure it, and how to measure the services that that it provides. And then also to do some research on really comparing and evaluating the different modeling, monitoring, and measurement tools. Another recommendation that was made was a request for proposals for developing a specific tool that could be used in Vermont to monitor and quantify ecosystem services. And then growing the VESP program as a pilot and to start to pay farmers and just try it out and figure out how to do it. Another recommendation was it's really important to sustain funding for the existing programs that are already working to support farmers and investing in ecosystem services. Let's see. Joshua and I ran some focus groups with farmers about payment for ecosystem services. And I think it's relevant to this conversation, but I don't want to spend too much time because I think I'm 3 minutes over. But farmers are mostly concerned about which farmers benefit, that's that fairness issue, if the payments are going to be worth it, if they're going to be enough, how the program would interact with other incentive programs they value, and then who has control of the data and if it could be used for regulation in the future. Just so folks know, the Agency of Agriculture, I think, received $7 million very recently for a 5-year pilot to run a pay-for-performance phosphorus program in the state. I think it's limited in the type of management that it will reward, but it's exciting that this is happening in the next 5 years. I think they're planning to enroll farmers this winter. John Winston has been working on a SIG grant from the NRCS to figure out a pay for performance phosphorus program with a lot of different stakeholders involved. So that's happening. And I'm sure there's lots of other conversations and research going on. There's some at UVM. I've heard that Vermont Law School is having conversations about this. So I'm excited to hear from folks today about what else I don't know yet about what could happen. So what's next here? We have about 30 minutes of discussion and addressing direct questions related to the presentations. I can't see the chat box right now because I'm in presenter view, but I'm sure there's tons. And we really want to focus on anything that needs clarification or came up directly from those presentations. What's missing? Like, what didn't we include that's really important? And which recommendations that were listed stand out as highest priority? Then we'll take a little break. We'll return at 4 o'clock, and then we'll pick breakout groups. And you can either choose to be in the water quality and climate change group or the payment for ecosystem services group. And when you decide which breakout group you want to do, you can enter it into the chat. And then we will come back together as a whole session for about 15 minutes at the end to hear key takeaways from each of the groups. So I'm going to stop sharing. And open it up to questions here and look in the chat box. So many. Okay. Joshua or Kelly, if you have any questions that you feel like were most urgent, if you read through them while I was talking, or you can go back to the first one that was posed. I think it was from Kat Buxton, and just answer them in order. And so Kat's question, oh, maybe I have to go back farther. Yep. Oh, there's too many questions, you guys. We need to talk for days about this. We should have like a 2-day retreat just on these topics. All right, the first question I think was from Kat at 3:05. I know that researchers do not always get to choose what gets researched or how. Do you have suggestions for what citizens can do to move funding toward adaptation strategies such as agroforestry and practices such as reduced tillage, fertilizers, hedgerows, multi-species cover crops, perennial forages, holistic grazing management? My first thought was like SARE grants are a great place to start, right? Those can be led by farmers. Joshua?
Yeah, I had that thought as well. I also think that, you know, there are opportunities at times when agencies look for input from, you know, stakeholders about what their funding priorities should be for research. So I think conversations with people who are engaged in that type of research, you know, making your priorities known, even conversations with legislators sometimes, I think, you know, as they check in with agencies about funding priorities, I think all those can have some effect. I don't know that there is, you know, a very clear path. You know, I don't want to give that impression, but yeah.
Okay, and then I think there was a question from someone about the offset markets and integrating with the climate framework under the Paris Accords. And I don't think I'm the best person to answer that question, but Gordon, if you want to mention what you're concerned about in that question there for the group, that'd be great.
Yeah, so under the Kyoto protocols, offset markets were really incentivized because it wasn't a nationally directed program. It was just like a piecemeal approach. But under the Paris Climate Accords, and kind of really starting this year, the nationally determined contributions to reduction of greenhouse gases don't really allow for offset markets to exist in the like low-hanging fruit spaces, just because you could then double count these emission reductions, which then would incentivize large polluters to just continue their status quo and doesn't contribute towards a transition of systems instead of just incentivizing compliance. So yeah, that's basically where my concern comes from with leaning into the idea of offset markets, especially with carbon, and just how that would, those two things would interact.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. I wonder how you think about like a state-run program maybe could avoid those issues.
Yeah, and I mean, that's kind of what I'm seeing makes the most sense, is a publicly administered program instead of a market mechanism. Obviously, political realities and all of that stuff come into the mix as soon as you start dealing with government. But yeah, so it's just, how do we get from where we are to where we need to be is always the question with this stuff, right?
Yeah, thanks for sharing. The next question on the list is, I think, for Joshua. Tell us more about projects in place to develop the data linking soil health and water health. It seems so inherently obvious. Are the studies only on farms, or do they compare with natural systems? Can you elaborate on the gaps?
Yeah, so the study that we've just begun is piggybacking off of a larger watershed scale study, which is funded by NRCS. It's called SEEP, Conservation Effects Assessment Project, and it's looking at the impact of, or the effect of conservation practices at a watershed scale. So, you know, we're talking 15,000, 20,000 acre watersheds. That's happening in Addison County. And so we've, NRCS has also funded an investigation of, to see if there's, if the soil health changes over time correlate with a water quality signal. And so we're doing kind of shotgun sampling, 35 different fields within our 2 watersheds that we're comparing to one another, where we're testing for soil health, and we'll be doing that this year. Actually, most of them are complete. Some folks were out today doing some more sampling, and we'll probably do that hopefully again every 3 to 5 years. You know, this is the water quality study is a long-term endeavor with hopefully 10 plus years of monitoring work. And so this is a really, in science, an exciting opportunity to get funding that of that duration. And so we're going to pair this up with soil health and see what we see. And it's very difficult to do. As some folks in Ohio have started to try to do this, and it's just kind of, there are some challenges with it because you have so many fields that contribute to a watershed, and soils and fields are variable amongst them, you know, within the boundaries. So it is challenging. To your second question, none of that work will not be comparing soil health to natural systems. And that's interesting because the metrics we use to, like if we use the Cornell Soil Health Assessment, really it's a relative test. So we're comparing soils of a certain texture to soils of the same texture. And so you have this different scale for each soil of a certain texture in a farming system. And so there's very little data in that relative database from natural systems. So it's not you'd be comparing apples to oranges if you submitted a natural system soil health test to that database. We haven't perfected how to measure soil test, and that is how to measure soil health, and that's part of the challenge too, I think, with incorporating multiple types of management systems.
Great. So we have a couple related questions here that were the next ones. And maybe I'll just read them, and then I think maybe Joshua, you're the best person to address them, about kind of on-farm composting of manure. So from Maddie Kempner of NOFA, Vermont, how significant is the opportunity to do more on-farm composting of manure along with food waste collection, and how could the state support more of those systems on dairy farms? And then related to her question, Janine Bartlett from rural Vermont asked, where is the science on water quality and soil health effects of solid manure versus liquid manure. There are containment issues with storage of solid manure, but what about once they're spread on the field? And then there's, oh, here, Kat Buxton has another one that's related. There's so many questions. If we can do all three of these together, maybe we'll get to more. This is from Kat Buxton. What do you think about increasing the production of fungal-dominated compost, such as modified Johnson-Su, with the desired outcome of increasing native fungal network in our vast overtilled soils in Vermont? Is there research potential for this? Compost.
I'll try to remember all of those questions.
Sorry, maybe I should just give you one at a time. Okay. But they kept saying, "Oh, this is related," so I thought I'd put it together.
It is. On the compost question, yeah, I mean, we have just working on a proposal with some folks in engineering, looking at you know, what's going to happen to as the organics law comes into effect, and there's a lot of organics being diverted. Where do these go? How are these handled? And I think there is an opportunity to do more composting on farms. I think that, you know, it does require space, it requires infrastructure, it requires equipment. So it's not a simple thing to just dump all their food waste on a farm and say, deal with it. You know, there's a cost associated with it, and it becomes a whole, like an anaerobic digester, it becomes an operation in and of itself on the farm. So I think that, you know, it's going to, I think we can figure it out, but it's not as straightforward. But the same goes for food waste into digesters too, the 15 some digesters that we have. I think there's an opportunity there for food waste to go to those. Let's see, the next question was on liquid versus solid manure. That is a recurring question that comes up. I have conversations with it every now and then. I'm not aware of any good peer-reviewed literature on kind of comparing soil ecology, water quality impacts of a liquid versus a solid compost. Just the, you know, the presence of the water there and how that might impact, and the anaerobic state of the manure, the liquid manure. So that's a stumper. There's a clear research need there. It's just I'm not aware of any. Someone else here may be, so please speak up if you know of any research on that. And then the third one was a question about alternative methods of composting. Kat, you may very well know more about that one than I do, or perhaps Juan. I see Juan Alves, Dr. Juan Alves is on here. He may want to say something about that one, but I am not you know, immersed in that literature.
That was great. Thanks. Just to get a couple more questions in before break, Molly Anderson asked if there are any existing performance-based PES programs in the US right now. And there is one in California based on carbon, and it's funded, I think, by their carbon market. So it's a little different than what we could do here, but there is a model. And then I do know of a program that, I don't know if it's still happening, was in Florida, which paid dairy farmers for reducing phosphorus export near the Everglades. So there are a couple models, but not many. And then there's a couple questions here about the fairness issue. So Kat's question regarding fairness, agreed that all farms need to be included at scale and in context. Considering that 98% of land is white owned, isn't that just accentuating the wealth access gap? How can we bring that into the conversation? That is a great question. And so people have talked about doing differentiated payments for farmers that have either it's more challenging to access, or if they're smaller farms and the cost for investing in changes is more, you could maybe pay smaller farms more. And I know that the new program that the NRCS funded through the Agency of Ag is looking for some input on prioritizing who gets to participate and how the funding levels might be different. So there's opportunity for input there. It's a great thought. And then Jeannie had a related question. She said, I've been part of the fairness versus results efficiency conversation before. The thought I'm having now is, couldn't there be great efficiency in demonstrating that leaders are rewarded And if you are dragging your feet, you miss the boat. Some practice-based programs could remain in place to help those latecomers to get up to par, but I'm increasingly confident that foot draggers shouldn't be especially rewarded, so it won't actually be more efficient to do so. I guess that's a comment more than a question, but hopefully maybe you'll be in the PES group and we can get into that after break. Gordon mentioned that the Welsh system has been wrestling with those kinds of problems, and there might be some insights there. Okay, and so let's see. I just want to let folks know, if you feel like you want to jump off and have a full 15-minute break, you're welcome to leave and come back at 4 o'clock so we can go into breakout sessions. If folks want to stick around for another 5 minutes of Q&A, I can take 5 minutes off my break. Joshua, are you willing to do that too? Yeah, we talked a little longer than we were supposed to.
Yeah, we did.
Let's see.
You're both doing great, so don't worry.
Thanks, Kelly. Kelly,
And
also, do you want to just let folks know if they haven't given you their word? One person sent me a personal message about their preference for group, and I'll forward it to you. But do you want to, do you have any announcements for folks?
I've assigned everyone to a room. If you told me what you wanted, you went into your room. And if you didn't tell me, you went into climate and water quality. So right now we have an equal mix for both rooms. So if you didn't tell me, you're probably going into climate and water quality. Okay, I'll make sure I move that person. And then just so you all know, there is a very hard stop at 4:55. So I'll be ending the meeting at that time, because this is the same Zoom account to go on to the closing remarks. And once we get back from breakouts, I'll share the closing remarks Zoom information in the chat, or you can find it on your agenda.
Great, thanks, Kelly. And thanks everybody for being here. It's it's a huge group and it's really exciting. Another question here. What are the limiting factors for farms who can join the Payment for P program? So I don't know all the specific details, but I know that there's a webinar on the Agency of Agriculture website. It's kind of, I think it's close to where the PES working group resource materials were. And so you can see Ryan Patch's presentation on that. And I think he also is pretty welcome to answering stuff by email. But I think that they're using Farm Prep as the program that will help them model impact, and that it's just limited to, I think, hay and corn to start till they figure out how to make it work. And also because that's the information they have in Farm Prep. So yeah, that, well, we can talk about that later, but I think there's a really interesting issue is if we use models to estimate impact, then it's hard to incentivize innovative practices because they're not in the models. But hopefully we'll be doing more monitoring and on-farm research to be able to build a system that would be adaptive and be able to incorporate new information all the time. I mean, that's the goal, I hope. Joshua, if you see questions in here that you want to get to, let me know. Any possibility, Molly Anderson asked, any possibility of a pay for performance for P combined with recapturing P? We're running out fast. Where's Eric Roy?
Yeah, so, you know, actually, I think that some of the proponents of a pay for performance P scheme actually see that being the manure P removal systems being a core component of those schemes. So we have a couple farms in Vermont that have a technology that removes P from the manure and keeps it in a solid form, and then the liquids can then be field applied, and they maintain most of their nitrogen content. And that's part of what the Vermont Phosphorus Innovation Challenge was funding, was investigation on that. So we've done some work on the performance of those systems and have a couple more grants coming down the road to study that and compost operations as well as.
So we're at 3:50, and I'm just gonna go grab some water. I think I might take a break, but I'll leave my screen on, and I welcome everyone to go hydrate a little bit before we get back at 4. And I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions at the end, but hopefully that they'll get brought up in the breakout sessions. And of course, if you want to reach out to me afterwards, you can email me. I'm open to that. Anybody? Joshua, are you gonna stick around?
I might step out for just a minute, but yeah, I'll be around otherwise.
Okay.
Thanks for facilitating, Alyssa.
Sure. Thanks for doing the intro.
Yep, you bet.
All right, we're at 4:01. I think maybe we should get started. What do you think, Joshua?
Sounds good.
I've got a note from Kelly here that we just say the word and it'll push everyone into their breakout groups. We lost, I think, 9 people over break, but maybe they'll come back. And the sessions will run for 35 minutes and give us a 30-second warning before they push everyone back to the main session.
So let's see. So we'll come back at 4:35 or 4:40. What would? Maybe
I think my thought was it would take us 5 minutes right now to get everybody into their breakout rooms, but
yep. So still coming back at 4:40.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Yeah. Well, I think she just sets them for a certain amount of time. So at this point,
yeah, it will be 35 minutes from when I hit the go button.
4:37.
Yeah.
4:38.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Kelly.
You're welcome.
All right. See everybody in there.
Okay. Ready, set, go.
You can engage, and I'm going to actually I need to get clarity from Kelly. Were you able to take notes in this one, or should I be doing that?
I'm gonna attempt to take some notes for you.
Okay, great.
Okay.
I will ask questions and try to guide the discussion to meet our objectives. But yeah, thank you very much. Okay. So let's see here. So really, first question, if we can try to keep the climate change and the water quality, or at least, somewhat separate, or at least kind of refer to which brief you're talking about, or if you were mentioning one specifically, that would be helpful. But really, the first question on those 2 briefs is twofold. What's missing, and then whose perspective is missing? So, it'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on that, or did we not get input from certain stakeholders on those, or important voices missing? And then are there things that we totally dropped the ball on and missed altogether? So please.
Are we just
awkward
Are we
Zoom
just
silence.
popcorn? Hop in here?
Yeah, popcorn. Yeah, let's do popcorn. I mean, I think that'll work. If it doesn't work, we'll move to the hand thing. But let's do. Yeah.
Okay.
Just pipe up if you have something to say.
I'm not sure this is a direct response to your questions, because I think the 2 briefs are really, really great. And there was no immediate glaring gaps for me, but related to the water quality one, I am interested in how the nutrient management plans can be more relevant for all the farmers that are required to write them and follow them. Definitely see some farmers make changes in response to those. And then there's a lot of cases where it doesn't seem to be a particularly meaningful document for them. And I'm interested in a conversation about how those can be of greater value to the farmers that are putting time in.
Do you think is that correlated with farm size or farm type, or is it just some use and some don't?
I think that the farms that only grow grass tend to get less out of the nutrient management planning process. For sure, they sometimes might have a field that's high phosphorus and they need to have a drawdown strategy, but it's usually pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't mean that those farms don't have water quality contributions. It's just not necessarily captured in the nutrient management plan. Sure. We don't need to stay on that. I wanted other people who might have thoughts on gaps can raise that.
I don't know if Joshua, if you want to respond to Jeannie first or not, but I have kind of a separate question.
No, I think that no, I don't need to respond. Just kind of a listening, session here.
I am really interested in talking more just broadly around when we think about water quality. We are so focused on phosphorus, and that has really influenced the conversation around PES. And obviously, there's so much funding going into this pay for performance program, which I hope the outcome of that is going to be really positive. But I feel like the thing that we don't talk about in reference to water quality often enough is other contaminants in our waterways, like pesticides and herbicides in particular. And I'm curious if you all talked about that as part of the water quality brief.
Yeah, that's a really great point. We did have some conversation about that. It did not rise to the surface, and I don't exactly know why it didn't. I think that the TMDL and a potential TMDL in the Connecticut River Valley were really driving the conversation at the time we were writing the brief. But I completely agree, and there's so little that's known about that too. There's a huge gap in the research. So I think that's a really important point that we can make, as this group.
Yeah, I just feel like similarly to just the climate side of the conversation and just soil health in general, if we're so focused on just increasing, soil's potential to sequester carbon or building soil organic matter, we might lose sight of the importance of the biological life in the soil, which can be, I think, negatively impacted by pesticides and herbicides. So I just feel like all of these conversations need to have a more holistic lens, and I worry that the focus on phosphorus, and I understand where that comes from with the TMDL, but that it just is going to make us miss some of these questions. That's all.
Yep, great point. I know we did discuss glyphosate at a point during the writing of the brief, and it it didn't make it in, but I think that's a really good point. Other things that didn't make it that you were surprised, climate change as well. Not just water quality, but there was the climate change brief. Yes, go right ahead. I saw a hand.
Sorry. Literally just forgot my question. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I'm trying to unmute myself. I'll be back in a minute.
Okay, no
I have a
problem.
question. You were talking about whose perspective is missing, and I'm wondering about people who are directly affected by water quality and just not being able to drink clean water. And it's a big issue all over the world, but how's it in Vermont, and how's data on that? Because a lot of times research on these kind of things is very little, and these are the voices that are unheard.
Mm-hmm.
Through that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that links pretty closely to Maddie's comment as well, because these, maybe more so than phosphorus and nutrients, that we could see human health impacts from pesticides and other agrochemicals. So yeah, thank you for raising that.
I remembered.
Okay.
I noticed in the brief that a pretty high percentage of farmers said that they just didn't know how to deal with climate change and what to do on their farms. Do you know what type of educational resources are out there for them, or what kind of outreach is happening so that farmers do have a better sense of what they can control?
Yeah. So the program that I work with at UVM Center for Sustainable Ag, we have a farming and climate change program there, and we do our best to reach as many farmers as possible. But Vermont's it's not a big state, but there's only a couple of us in the program, so we do our best, and really the education to a degree is about principles. And not about specific individual practices. We'll talk about principles around soil health improvement, principles around keeping soils covered, principles around water management. But the research, I think, the topic of climate change resiliency is still, I guess, on the academic timescale, a little new for us to have developed specific management practices just geared toward climate change adaptation. So at this point, we educate about principles, and we just raise awareness. Farmers are very aware that things have been changing, but one of the things everyone is curious about is, what does the future look like? What does the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years look like? And so we use whatever data we can, Vermont generated at the Vermont, kind of resolution, and provide that to farmers. And we have a website and have some fact sheets and that sort of thing.
Have you considered using the peer-to-peer model that an organization like Champlain Valley Farmers Coalition uses?
Yeah,
over in the Connecticut watershed?
Yeah, we actually have a new program starting off. We received some funding for, it's called Climate Adaptation Fellowship, where we go into farming. We recruit some farmer leaders, and could be across sectors: dairy, livestock, veg, fruit, whatever. And we really, kind of develop a relationship with those farmer leaders, arm them with the best climate data, the best adaptation information that we have, and then kind of release them back out into the farming community and say, please have conversations, and we're going to kind of track these conversations, support you for those conversations, because it's absolutely true that farmers listen to other farmers much more than they listen to us, to me, or to any other agricultural service provider. So yeah, that's the recruitment stage is finished. That's across New England, working with Rachel Chapman at the University of Maine, and that'll be happening over the next year to 2 years.
Thank you.
Yeah. Jeannie, was that a hand?
Yeah. I guess in the climate change brief, something that came to mind is there wasn't any mention of tree planting or agroforestry, which could be considered tangential to farm to plate and actual food production, or could be considered integral to it, depending on your perspective. I wasn't sure whether that was intentionally just didn't rise to the top, but it's something a lot of people are interested in.
Yeah.
Kind of.
That was on an initial list of discussion topics. And I mean, I don't want to make excuses, but we were, held pretty tightly to a front and back of a one-page document, which became very challenging once you incorporate figures and text boxes. And it was on there originally, but I guess, to be fair, it didn't rise to the top as one of those things to include in the brief. But yeah, there is a lot of interest out there from farms. So I'm going to move on to the next question. So of the priorities, the recommendations that we presented in the climate change and water quality brief, do any of those rise to the top for you as priorities? As absolutely, we've got to do this one. This is it.
Can you put them back up, Joshua?
Yeah, I can do that. I think. Give me just a sec. Okay. So I'll start with the climate change recommendations. So just to briefly recap, training program for ag service providers so that they can kind of then take that information to farmers. Investigate market mechanisms, PES systems. Talked quite a bit about that. Innovative funding mechanisms, especially related to crop insurance, because it is so difficult it is proven difficult for small farms to engage in crop insurance, and making sure that that farms have a financial cushion when climate change events occur, disturbances occur. And then, carbon sequestration. That kind of this last recommendation relates back to the PES as well. So those were for climate change. So let's maybe just pause right there. Any of those recommendations, anybody have any strong feelings about what should be a priority? Which of these should be a priority?
At the risk of talking too much, I will say I love the idea of the ag service provider training. I feel like the more we can utilize the amazing people and resources we have at UVM Extension and the conservation districts and NRCS to implement and throughout the farm viability service provider network, I think that's an excellent thing. I would also add the idea of funding for, and this is kind of going back to water quality, so I'll say it quickly, but the idea of potentially funding service providers to work toward reducing pesticide and herbicide use in the same way that they have funding and are tasked with reducing phosphorus and have to report back regularly on that. I feel like just using that same framework on pesticides and herbicide would be really beneficial.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Give this one just another minute, and then I'll move on to the recommendations for water quality.
I think one thing that jumps out for me is investigating the funding mechanisms for assisting with these practices, because I found it sort of alarming in your brief where you mentioned that adaptation, having a financial capacity to deal with the threats posed by climate change and to be more adaptive isn't funded by any financial or technical assistance program in Vermont. And with the urgency there was part of me that was just screaming, well, why not? Like, why, isn't that a really scary place for us to be in? And so I would think that finding ways to assist with funding for making these changes would be pretty crucial.
It's kind of shocking, isn't it, that there isn't any funding for that?
I totally agree, Emily. And I think relatedly, I've heard, and I know that you guys found this in your, focus groups around climate change with farmers, but I think anyway, but just funding to support research into water management systems beyond tile drainage, because I know that we are, projected to see more precipitation. So drainage obviously is really important, but we're also seeing a lot more drought periods and longer drought periods. And so systems that can help farms both conserve water and manage drainage feels like a huge need. And maybe that was included, but it feels important.
Not to get too political.
Like all of these.
You go. Go ahead. Well, not to get too political, but I'm wondering if there are secretaries of ag that you would like the incoming administration to consider that might help with the funding issue that you just discussed, because let's face it, that's where a lot of the money comes from, the feds.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So specific, right? Specific individuals that may be able to assist.
Specific individuals, or, well, let me frame it a different way. Yeah. Would you, review specific individuals that you might consider to be allies, and then contacting the administration, the incoming administration, to suggest that they advocate for those folks?
As extension, I think I have to stay out of that one, but certainly others on this call could do something like that.
Well, you could do it in your personal capacity.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Marsha Fudge, anybody? Shelley Pingree? I can't.
There's some ideas here. Okay. All right. In the interest of time, I want to move to the recommendations related to water quality. I'm trying to, I have too much going on my screen here. Okay. So recommendations for water quality were to fund our conservation districts and farmer organizations, these, these watershed groups, to do more peer-to-peer education about improved management, with the specific idea that we know this is the most effective way of implementing change is peer-to-peer, farmer to farmer. So let's fund that. Let's really fund it. Next recommendation, $5 million to do some intensive monitoring of performance of best management practices at the field scale to inform a potential PES program, or just to better understand the science of what works on Vermont soils and Vermont farming systems. And we do have a couple projects that are working to do that. And I've listed those there, and those have come about since the writing of this brief. So we are working on that. And then monitoring, $1 million to monitoring soil health, building a statewide database, benchmarking our soil, our specific, soils in that dominate certain areas of the state for farming, and correlating changes in soil health best management practices. Funding the agency's programs which help with payment, assisting farmers with their water quality BMPs, and purchasing the equipment, the capital necessary to purchase the equipment to do these BMPs, like a no-till planter, for example. And then continue to fund the Vermont Phosphorus Innovation Challenge to launch some of the projects that are most promising that have been researched through that program to address the phosphorus surplus issue, whether that be, those projects are fairly diverse. There's manure P removal, there's, I think there was one on manure transfer, phosphorus redistribution, that sort of thing. So these are I think it was just one slide. Yep, one slide. So do any of those rise to the top for you?
I mean, I know how to do this. Do you want to just go, Emily?
Yeah, sure. The thing that rises to, it sounds like to me that there are some really big gaps in the research that seem pretty critical to moving forward in this. Like if it didn't even make the cut for the impacts of glyphosate and other agrochemicals and their impact on clean water, if that didn't even make the cut to make the brief, like that is, signaling some alarm bells for me. And you mentioned that there's just a lack of research in general about the way that agrochemicals affect water quality, and the way soil health and the way we manage that affects water quality. And so I would think that that would be a glaring priority, to try to make those connections in a way that, that's really supported with data, so that we can start to move forward on some of those things. And I feel like they're missing, and it sounds like they need to be researched.
I like that, expanding this research so it's just not about nutrients, but to incorporate the agrochemical component into some of these recommendations. I think that sounds like a great idea.
If I can piggyback off that a little bit, in terms of the monitoring and database development, to not just look at water quality, but just look at general survey of what the land is doing. And we have some metrics that actually help us understand that. And there's a lot of research coming out about how to track these things, from the relatively simple scientific tracks of carbon and water quality and things like that, but to biodiversity. which is a crisis that we're not talking about right now, and is something that is hugely impactful to our food system, and really needs to get some attention. So I think expanding a little bit, that monitoring and kind of baseline assessment of the Vermont ecosystem needs to expand beyond water or carbon, and kind of look at the overall health of the system that we live in and operate in, and see, then we can get an idea of where we need to go, right? Like, and that's the constant problem with all of these things at scale, is we don't have the capability to know what we need to do in most cases. Like, there's anecdotal truths that a lot of farmers are able to speak to when it comes to what's happening on their land, but not having that scientific data behind it will translate to no action by policymakers ever, because they need those data number sets to be able to lean on when it comes to some scrutiny in the political system. So yeah, I would just recommend a real widening of that survey, and just seeing if it's possible to look at the overall health. And there's ways to do that statistically, so we don't have to monitor the health of the whole state, but a statistical sample of what the state looks like, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think when we work in soils, for example, we never take soils outside of the field boundary. So that's we never understand what the effect is, just beyond the fence. And I think some of those data, in the natural systems are being collected by others in Vermont. It's just, and part of it, maybe we just need to link with those efforts, and get out of our silos. So yes, thank you. Good point.
I just wanted to jump on as a farmer, not in my VSJF role, but we do grass-fed beef and pasture-raised pork. And these recommendations, the soil health part of it seems really exciting to me. And just building that kind of database so that we can see different soils throughout the state, and what that health is. I would like also to be measuring carbon, because that's really a lot of our arguments towards grass-fed beef and working towards that. It's good for consumers. If that kind of data was available, to be able to say, like, the work that we're doing to regenerate some pastures that have been in hay production for 50 plus years, and now we're regenerating that with hoofs, with goats, and with beef, with another farm. It'd be great to have all that data. We do soil testing on our land, but it'd be nice to have something to compare it to more. So I think that would be really great. And also the Phosphorus Innovation Challenge, a lot of really cool stuff has come out of that. So I would love to see that continue as well.
Can I ask Kelly?
Fiona?
Oh, sorry, was somebody else going to talk?
Yeah.
I think, maybe.
I have a quick question. So kind of going off the first point of like the farmer to farmer like education, I'm kind of also thinking of that in connection to like future generations of farmers. And are like these recommendations being like taught in like 4-H programs, or like places like the Hannaford Career Center in Middlebury, like are like, can that happen, or is that happening? I don't know if that's a very relevant question, but.
It's super relevant. I don't know that it is happening. I don't know that we certainly do some water quality education within 4-H with some of the 4-H programs, but I don't know that we get down into the nuts and bolts of how you actually do that on a farm. So yeah, that's a great idea. So many of our younger farmers have kids too. So hopefully there's a little bit of generational transfer occurring. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to jump off of Fiona's point, I attended last year's Farm to Plate, and we had kind of this gathering. I forgot the exact name, but it was basically just the younger generation in terms of like college students work, like what college students are doing in this talk. And right now I see a bunch of my friends from school actually, and I'm really happy. That makes me so happy. And that's kind of what I was thinking. Like, I love everything that's being said. And, you know, like, we really want to be involved in like more hands-on work. Like, I would really want to spend like 3, 4, 5 months working on a farm and like testing soil and everything. So then my question is, how is this information kind of trickling down to college students? And, you know, like, our schools may not have like a big department that is mainly focused on like farming or like soil health and climate and all that. But how does the farm to plate legislature itself get involved with the colleges in the area itself? Because trust me, I know so many people on my campus who are interested in like food studies, and I'm one of them. I love farming and everything. I grew up on a farm and everything. So I think it would be really like beneficial to like start normalizing giving this information to the younger generation, because we're gonna be, you know, at some point we're gonna take over these farms. We're gonna be taking care of the soil. We're gonna be tending to the land. So I don't know. I was just kind of curious as to the initiatives that are out there for us to get involved in and sort of like actually do the hands-on work. And, you know, hopefully next year I'm planning to do this soil testing with one of my professors. I'm going to test the soil on campus. We're going to send them to UVM or something. But like, I don't want it to end there. I want to go out there. I don't want to just test the soils at my school. So I'm kind of interested in discourse around that and how that's kind of being worked on.
I love that recommendation. I mean, we do a little bit of, you know, hands-on training at UVM, being the land grant, but I think there's room for a lot more in a recommendation that comes from Farm to Plate, you know, Vermont Sustainable Jobs Foundation, to our colleges, that we need to start getting serious about educating our young people and our college students about how to farm and care for the land is a really, really good idea.
I agree with that too, and I'm taking down all the notes in the session, and I'll make sure that that gets back to everyone, because I really agree with that, and that's part of our overall like next 5 to 10 year plan for Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, is just to engage the younger generation in all of this work in general, because you're exactly right.
So we have about 3 minutes left. You know, other ideas, you know, anything you really want to, you know, kind of make sure that we hear in the time remaining, whether it's priorities or something we missed, or ideas for how to make these things happen, you know, how to make the recommendations happen.
This is more of a question. I was wondering if you were working with more experimental programs like Rich Earth Institute's Urine Diversion Program, which is looking to take the nitrogen that they can extract through their machines, for lack of a better way to put it, and using that as fertilizer for farms. I know that they're doing some testing and there's some data with that. And the idea is that they are getting some funding from Long Island Sound, because that's nitrogen that's going into the Connecticut River, which obviously goes all the way down to New York. So I'm wondering what, if any, connections you folks have with them.
Yeah, at UVM, we've had conversations. I don't work with them personally. I've had some, you know, back and forth with them a little bit. I think, sadly, geography tends to get in the way, because they're in Brattleboro, right?
Right. Yeah, they are.
Yep. Yep. But aware of their work. They're doing some really cool stuff, you know, out there, you know, way in front. So I'll take that as a, you know, recommendation to become more involved and engaged with them.
We have about 1.5 minutes left before.
Okay.
Out.
Final thoughts from anyone? Emily?
This is a big topic to get into with a minute left, less than a minute left, but I've been hearing a lot of talk about, the ailing dairy industry and the impact of conventional dairy on water quality, and particularly Lake Champlain. And, a lot of people have been speaking out about this notion of helping these dairy farmers who are struggling make a just transition to regenerative, climate resilient, soil positive methods. And I just wonder, it never came up in this group, and I was surprised, I suppose. Is it just that it's too politicized? Is it too, it seems like it's not even on the table in these circles, even though I'm hearing a lot about it through the Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition and other places. And so I guess I
feel like it's too big.
It's too big. Tough timing.
I feel like that's what the farmer to farmer bullet point was kind of about, and the discussions of soil erosion and that kind of thing. But yeah, the first bullet point, farmer to farmer and conservation districts, like those groups largely center around dairy and helping them adopt regenerative practices. So
and there is a dairy water collaborative that NOFA, I believe, is administering to get farmers and environmentalists to speak to each other in the similar language, so that farmers don't feel like they're put upon.
We've been a part of it, but that's kind of on hold right now. But yeah, I think like a lot more of that type of effort and kind of just long-term relationship building and networking is a big part of what's needed for sure. Yeah.
I think we're going to get booted off in 10 seconds.
Sorry, guys.
See everyone in a minute. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. We had some good conversation. Hopefully you did as well. So I think the idea now is to just share with the entire group some key points from our breakouts. Kelly, I'm wondering, you have the notes. If you could send those to me, or if you want to share, I don't know how you want to do that.
Put them into the chat for you, but I'll copy and paste them here for everybody. But I just kind of took some comments down and some responses so people can see them. But a lot of great things came up throughout. I don't know what's really rising to the top for you.
I'll start with a couple, then maybe we'll bounce to you, Alyssa, if you want to share some things, and if anyone else wants to chime in. I think two of the big things that really stick in my mind about our conversation was that, one, we're missing anything about agrochemicals in the water quality brief, that was absent. And so I think that's a really fair point. And there's a lot of research that needs to be done on that. And in some ways it's that maybe is neglecting the end user, the water, the people who actually swim and drink the water more than the nutrient issues. And so that rose to the top. And then we need to get young people engaged and educated on climate change and water quality, on appropriate ways of responsible ways of farming, sustainable ways of farming, how to care for the land. And that can happen with school-age children, but that also needs to happen in our colleges, that we need to have programs that are making sure students get hands-on experience with how to farm appropriately, but the science of conservation as well, for those who want to go on and work for an agency, or as a consultant, or as a scientist, and study soils and water and climate change and agriculture. So those are two big themes that are, right, without reviewing the notes, that really stuck in my mind If others have something to add, please do. But I'll read through these notes in the chat, but then maybe I'll just pass it to Alyssa to do a little report out as well.
Okay, great. So we had a pretty good discussion. I think we touched on some important topics. I feel like we only scratched the surface of what you could talk about and make recommendations based on what an awesome group we had. I think we tried to whittle it down to 3 key takeaways, which is what I think Farm to Plate is hoping we will come back to them with. And so the first topic of conversation was about fairness and equity and who gets represented in the conversation and who gets rewarded by payment for ecosystem services programs. So really would like to make a direct recommendation that Indigenous and BIPOC voices are better represented in the conversation and that they get a seat on the PES working group. And it seems like there is potential for that to definitely happen. So that is exciting and also really important. And then the other part of the fairness conversation that we had was about what kind of farmers get to participate in and be rewarded by a PES program, and touches on things we mentioned in the presentation during the first part. But Vicki Drew did a great job of talking about how the existing programs like EQIP are really well structured to support farmers that maybe have not invested in conservation in getting those practices up. And the goal of the PES and the pay for performance programs is to really be rewarding higher performing farmers. And so that's exciting that's really being addressed already in the way people think about PES programs. And so if Vicki, you want to say more to the whole group about that, you're welcome to. The next major topic that our group mentioned was the importance of thinking about models for programs that take a more holistic approach rather than just a reductionist one. It's really easy to design programs if you just focus on amounts of phosphorus or amounts of carbon, especially when we're talking about performance-based programs. But maybe that there's a lot more work that we could be doing to look at models for bundled approaches to quantify to rewarding or paying for ecosystem services, and figuring out how to quantify biodiversity. It might be tough, but maybe it's something that we can do in Vermont. And then the third major theme, I think, from our talk was about diversification. And so we really acknowledge that the hay and cornfields and the field crops in Vermont take up the majority of the land cover in the state. And so they're the biggest leverage point to make gains in environmental outcomes by enhancing conservation and soil health practices, among other things on those lands. But that we really need to also think about diversifying away from dairy to get to more of like some of the root causes of phosphorus imbalance. And so we talked a bit about we talked about small grains and perennial grains, as well as pasture-based livestock management, and just the importance of centering on diversification as well. Okay. You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry. One other, I think, big takeaway from our group that there was a lot of support for was the idea of farmer-to-farmer education, peer-to-peer, and how important that that is, and that it should receive a funding priority, whether it's through the conservation districts or whether it's through the farmer watershed organizations, but that concept is important, and that was acknowledged by our group and should be seen as very impactful in these areas of climate change and water quality.
I can't find myself to unmute me because I don't normally brush my hair anymore. Oh my was like, who's that? I was just going to say that I put everything, the takeaways that I've kind of just captured from you both into the notes that we can share back. And I really think also our group for the water quality and also the soil testing really had a lot of comments around the holistic approach as well, of capturing more of that biodiversity and not focusing totally on phosphorus, but all the other things that are part of the soil.
Okay. Kelly, I'm going to put my summary notes into the chat box so you can get those.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. And then I wish we were in a room together so we could just non-verbally see who should speak next. This is so challenging.
We do have a few more minutes if anybody does want to talk a little bit more. I think we have to leave this room at 4:55, so.
Okay. Does anyone have any announcements that they'd like to share with the group? Kat Buxton has her hand up.
So one announcement I can say is that the Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition is planning its third soil series, educational networking series, this time in the Northeast Kingdom and the North Country of New Hampshire. So check that out in the winter, early 2021. But I also just wanted to take the opportunity to thank both Joshua and Alyssa for not just today, but for all of the incredible work that you guys do in the world to support so much of the work that we're all trying to do. Thank you so much. It's really amazing what you guys can contribute.
Thanks, Kat.
Thanks, Kat. Yeah.
I just threw the links for the closing remarks. I think it's really important if we could all go back to that meeting at the end so that we can kind of wrap up and talk about some takeaways. And Jake will be very disappointed if you don't. And also, I gave you the agenda again for the landing page if you don't have that, even though I keep giving it to people.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. And thanks for putting this together. I'm typing. Oh, Vicky's got her hand up.
I see Vicky has her hand up.
Thanks, guys. Since we have a minute, I think it's really important that we all stay focused on the positive that's come out of all of our great work. Josh talked a lot about some of the great water quality work that's been done. And for those of you who don't follow the TMDL as well as some of the rest of us have to for our jobs, 97% of the phosphorus reductions in 2019 to meet the TMDL for Lake Champlain were from the agricultural sector. And that is a huge accomplishment for all of us. And about 30% to 35% of our cropland is now planted with cover crops every year. And just in 5 to 10 years, we've seen that huge increase from all of the collective work that we've done. So I think it's important for us to celebrate our successes and not just continue to sort of go down that negative role of, we still have a lot of work to do. And I really love the ideas that I'm hearing about a holistic approach. And my 18-year-old daughter is sitting here with me listening to this because she's interested in pursuing environmental science in college and next year. And I just told her if I had 10 more people on my staff, we have a lot of tools and resources available to model a holistic approach.
Wow.
We just don't have the people to do that kind of work right now. So anyhow, great discussion. I'm glad I was able to be part of it. Thanks, Josh and Alyssa.
Thanks, Vicki. And I'll just say, I would, to your point of cover crop usage, this fall has been amazing. It's just been such a good year for cover crops. So if you haven't been out into the farming areas, go drive around, and those fields that would have been brown this time last year are often green right now. It looks really good.
Yeah, that's just a wonderful way to close with so much good news and optimism. Glad you're here, Vicki.
If I can share one more point along with Joshua's about seeing all the cover crops out. Up in Franklin County, I also work for the Franklin County Conservation District. We've started a campaign to try to raise the visibility of those practices in case you wouldn't notice it otherwise. So we have signs out, and several other organizations are doing similar things to highlight. It just says signs of conservation, or for my land, for our water, and then whatever practice you might be seeing. And we just launched an associated website called signsofconservation.org. And the signs are available all over the state. We're based in Franklin County, but you can put them up anywhere. So if you want signs to promote the practices that your neighbor farmers are doing and help your non-farming neighbors understand what's going on, feel free to get in touch with me via that website. And I'd be happy to connect you with some signs.
Thanks for sharing that. That's great.
Yeah, Jeannie, if you can add that to the, oh, perfect, thank you.
Let's see. All right, we'll hope to see lots of you in the closing session, which will be in just about 2 minutes here.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you, everyone.